Let's take a look at the second game from Prep Test 41. This game asks us to take two variable sets, songs and instruments, and figure out their order. It's a pretty classic 3D ordering game, so we'll just use our regular old 3D ordering game board, which is going to have two rows, one for the songs and one for the instruments, and we'll order them 1 through 4. The first rule is pretty straightforward. It eliminates F from the first position. Let's notate the second constraint in a conditional relationship that says that if S is performed on the K, then R is performed on the H. For the third constraint, we'll do the same thing, but this time if Q is performed on the K, then N is performed on the F. The final constraint may be the trickiest, but the best way to notate this would be to use a chunk, where K will be performed or will be used to perform the song immediately following the R and immediately preceding the N. A nice chunk like this will fit well into a game board like this. So now that we've got the constraints notated and the game board set up, I'd like you to think about how the game may be limited. So we're going to take a big pause for a second, pause the recording, and I'd like you to think about, is there any way in which we can see how the game may be limited? If you're familiar with games, one of the things you'll notice about 3D ordering games is that chunks oftentimes can drive the direction of the game. The chunk with R, K, and N is very restricted in terms of how we can fit it into our 3D game board here. R, K, N really can only go in spots 1 through 3 or 2 through 4. And as such, it gives us something to explore, a fork in the road that might give us an opportunity for creating some frames. So now that we've got a couple of game boards set up, one where the RKN chunk goes in 1 through 3 and one where it goes in 2 through 4, we might look at how the other characters kind of fit into the given situations. Notice that in the top row, we really only have Q and S left to place. And depending upon how we place Q and S, if we place Q here in the second position, well, that'll trigger Q with K. And if we trigger Q with K, that's going to force N here with F. If we were to go the other way, instead of going Q and then S, and instead we went S and then Q, well then we would have S here with K. And S with K is going to trigger the R with H rule. So it looks like in both this game board and in this game board, we're going to have two different ways of doing this. One where we go QS, and then one where we go SQ. In either way, we're going to get more information. Now, frames is tricky. We don't want to create too many game boards on our page where we have to sift through a lot of information and it takes us longer to read through that information than it would just to kind of plug our way through the game. But with a smaller game board like this, we've got a 2x4 game board. It's small enough that we might benefit from having 4 game boards. One where the RKN goes in 1 through 3, 2 different ways. One where the RKN goes in 2 through 4, 2 different ways. Let's go ahead and flesh that out and see what it looks like. So running out the first option both ways, we can either place Q in 2 and S in 4, or we can place S in 2 and Q in 4, and both of those will lead to additional inferences. Let's start with the first one here. When Q is with K, we can infer that N is going to be with F. Now that leaves G and H left over. We don't really know which way G and H will fit into the game, so let's just go ahead and place them in using a reversible option here. Down below, when S is with K, we know that R is with H, so that gives us an additional inference. But again, we're left with 2 characters, G and F, where we can't figure out exactly which way they go. So again, another reversible option here in this bottom left-hand corner frame. So now it's on to the other scenario where the RKN chunk goes in 2 through 4. I'm going to give you a second to go ahead and try this one on your own. Pause the recording and play this one out and see what happens. Clearly you're going to want to start with placing Q and S into the game. There's 2 ways of doing that. Either Q would go in 1 and S would go in 3, or S would go in 1 and Q would go in 3. And both of those will continue to lead to additional inferences. When S is here with K, we know from the second constraint that R will be with H. We can just go ahead and drop that in. That leaves us with F and G again. Now we know we can't place F here into the first slot, which will force F here into the fourth slot, and then K, or no, F. F will be over here, G will be over here into the first slot. We're making good progress. When Q is with K, by the third constraint, we know that N is going to be here with F. That leaves us with G and H left to place here in the bottom row. We don't really know which way they'll go, so again, another reversible option. I know it looks like we've spent a lot of time here setting up this game, but the reality is that we've front-loaded the work here. We've spent so much time setting things up. Really, this should be about a 4 or 5 minute process. We can knock through the questions here in 2 or 3 minutes and take what might be a 10 or 11 minute game and turn it into something that takes more like 6, 7, or even maybe 8 minutes. If there's a moral of a story here, keep in mind that 3D ordering games like to be framed. A large number of them can be framed, and one of the common mechanisms that you'll use in order to create such frames would be chunks that are limited to just a couple of places on the game board. So now that we've got the diagram set up, let's go ahead and take on some of the questions.